Yes, it is a code violation to install an electrical panel near a drinking fountain or water sink. The National Electrical Code, specifically Article 404.8, addresses this issue. Article 404.8 states that electrical equipment shall not be installed in wet or damp locations unless identified for use in such locations and listed by an approved testing agency. This requirement aims to prevent electrical hazards that can arise when electrical equipment is exposed to moisture. The key consideration here is the definition of wet or damp locations. Drinking fountains and water sinks are generally considered to be wet locations. This is because they are frequently exposed to water either through splashing, spills, or condensation. The presence of water significantly increases the risk of electrical shock and equipment damage. Therefore, electrical panels, which are critical components of an electrical system, cannot be installed near these areas unless they are specifically designed and listed for use in wet locations. The listing by an approved testing agency is crucial. This listing indicates that the equipment has been tested and found to be safe for use in wet environments. Such equipment is typically constructed with features that prevent water from entering the enclosure and causing electrical faults. These features may include watertight seals, corrosion-resistant materials, and specialized enclosures. The purpose of this code requirement is to ensure the safety of individuals who may come into contact with the electrical equipment, as well as to protect the equipment itself from damage. Installing an electrical panel in a wet location without the appropriate listing can lead to several potential hazards. Firstly, the risk of electrical shock is significantly increased. Water is an excellent conductor of electricity, and if water comes into contact with energized components within the panel, it can create a path for electricity to flow to ground, potentially causing severe injury or death to anyone who touches the panel or nearby conductive surfaces. Secondly, the electrical equipment can be damaged by moisture. Water can corrode electrical components, leading to malfunctions, short circuits, and even fires. The cost of repairing or replacing damaged equipment can be substantial, and the disruption to electrical service can be significant. Thirdly, a non-compliant installation can result in code violations and potential fines. Electrical inspectors are responsible for ensuring that electrical installations meet the requirements of the NEC, and they have the authority to require corrections or even shut down installations that are not in compliance. To comply with Article 404.8, it is essential to carefully assess the environment in which electrical equipment is to be installed. If the area is considered a wet or damp location, then only equipment that is specifically listed for use in such locations should be used. Alternatively, the equipment can be located in a dry location that is not subject to moisture. In some cases, it may be possible to provide additional protection to the equipment, such as installing a waterproof enclosure or providing adequate ventilation to prevent condensation. However, these measures must be carefully evaluated to ensure that they provide adequate protection and do not compromise the safety or performance of the equipment. It is also important to note that the specific requirements for electrical installations in wet locations may vary depending on the application and the local electrical codes. Therefore, it is always advisable to consult with a qualified electrical contractor or electrical engineer to ensure that the installation meets all applicable requirements. In summary, Article 404.8 of the National Electrical Code prohibits the installation of electrical equipment in wet or damp locations unless it is specifically listed for use in such locations. Drinking fountains and water sinks are considered wet locations, so electrical panels cannot be installed near these areas unless they are appropriately listed. This requirement is essential for ensuring electrical safety and preventing equipment damage. Compliance with this code requirement is crucial for protecting individuals from electrical shock and preventing costly repairs or fines. Therefore, it is always advisable to consult with a qualified electrical professional to ensure that electrical installations are safe and compliant with all applicable codes. Let's elaborate on the different types of locations as defined by the NEC to provide a clearer understanding. The NEC defines locations based on their exposure to moisture and other environmental factors. Understanding these definitions is crucial for selecting the appropriate electrical equipment and installation methods. Firstly, we have dry locations. A dry location is defined as a location not normally subject to dampness or wetness. A location classified as dry may be temporarily subject to dampness or wetness, as in the case of a building under construction. In dry locations, standard electrical equipment can be used, provided it is suitable for the voltage, current, and environmental conditions. Secondly, we have damp locations. A damp location is defined as a location that is subject to moderate degrees of moisture. This can include interior locations such as some basements, some barns, and cold storage warehouses, and partially protected locations under canopies, marquees, roofed open porches, and like locations. In damp locations, electrical equipment must be suitable for the environment. This typically means that the equipment must be protected against moisture and corrosion. Enclosures rated for damp locations, such as those with the NEMA 3R rating, are commonly used. Thirdly, we have wet locations. A wet location is defined as a location in which water or other liquids may drip, splash, or flow on or against electrical equipment. This includes locations such as car washes, unprotected locations outdoors, and some industrial facilities. As previously mentioned, drinking fountains and water sinks are also considered wet locations due to the frequent presence of water. In wet locations, electrical equipment must be specifically listed for use in wet locations. This equipment is designed to withstand prolonged exposure to water and prevent water from entering the enclosure and causing electrical faults. Enclosures rated for wet locations, such as those with an NEMA 4 or 4X rating, are commonly used. The NEC also addresses specific requirements for underground installations. Underground locations are considered wet locations, and all electrical equipment installed underground must be listed for use in wet locations. This includes cables, conduits, and enclosures. Additionally, the NEC provides specific requirements for wiring methods in wet locations. Wiring methods that are suitable for wet locations include types UF, use, and THWN conductors in rigid metal conduit, intermediate metal conduit, rigid non-metallic conduit, or liquid tight flexible metal conduit. These wiring methods are designed to provide a watertight seal and protect the conductors from moisture. When installing electrical equipment in wet locations, it is essential to pay close attention to the details of the installation. All connections must be made in a watertight manner, and all enclosures must be properly sealed to prevent water from entering. It is also important to ensure that the equipment is properly grounded to provide a path for fault current to flow to ground, which can help to prevent electrical shock. In addition to the NEC requirements, local electrical codes may also impose additional requirements for electrical installations in wet locations. Therefore, it is always advisable to consult with a qualified electrical contractor or electrical engineer to ensure that the installation meets all applicable requirements. Furthermore, it is important to consider the specific application when selecting electrical equipment for wet locations. For example, in a car wash, the equipment will be exposed to high-pressure water and detergents, so it is essential to select equipment that is specifically designed to withstand these conditions. In a food processing facility, the equipment may be exposed to corrosive chemicals, so it is essential to select equipment that is made from corrosion-resistant materials. In summary, the NEC defines locations based on their exposure to moisture and other environmental factors. These definitions are crucial for selecting the appropriate electrical equipment and installation methods. Dry locations are not normally subject to dampness or wetness. Damp locations are subject to moderate degrees of moisture, and wet locations are subject to water or other liquids dripping, splashing, or flowing on or against electrical equipment. When installing electrical equipment in wet locations, it is essential to use equipment that is specifically listed for use in wet locations and to pay close attention to the details of the installation to ensure that it is watertight and properly grounded. Consulting with a qualified electrical professional is always advisable to ensure that the installation meets all applicable requirements. Let's delve further into the specifics of Article 404.8 and its implications for electrical installations near water sources. Article 404.8 is titled Location, and it is part of Article 404, which covers switches, switchboards, and panel boards. This specific section addresses the placement of electrical equipment in relation to wet and damp locations to ensure safety and prevent electrical hazards. The core principle of Article 404.8 is that electrical equipment should not be installed in wet or damp locations unless it is specifically designed and listed for such environments. This requirement is crucial because water is an excellent conductor of electricity, and its presence can significantly increase the risk of electrical shock and equipment damage. The term electrical equipment in this context refers to a wide range of devices, including but not limited to switches, switchboards, panel boards, circuit breakers, and other control and protective devices. These components are essential for distributing and controlling electrical power, and their proper functioning is critical for the safety and reliability of electrical systems. The phrase wet or damp locations is also important to understand. As previously discussed, the NEC defines these terms based on the degree of exposure to moisture. Wet locations are those where water or other liquids may drip, splash, or flow on or against electrical equipment, while damp locations are subject to moderate degrees of moisture. Examples of wet locations include car washes and protected outdoor areas, and areas around drinking fountains and water sinks. Examples of damp locations include some basements, barns, and partially protected areas under canopies or porches. The requirement for equipment to be identified for use in such locations and listed by an approved testing agency is also significant. This means that the equipment must be specifically designed and tested to withstand the environmental conditions present in wet or damp locations. The listing by an approved testing agency, such as Underwriters Laboratories, ensures that the equipment has met certain safety standards and is suitable for its intended use. Equipment that is listed for wet locations typically has features such as watertight enclosures, corrosion-resistant materials, and specialized seals to prevent water from entering the enclosure and causing electrical faults. These features are essential for maintaining the integrity and safety of the electrical system in wet environments. In the context of installing electrical panels near drinking fountains or water sinks, Article 404.8 clearly prohibits such installations unless the panel is specifically listed for wet locations. This is because drinking fountains and water sinks are considered wet locations due to the frequent presence of water. Installing a standard electrical panel, which is not designed for wet locations, near a drinking fountain or water sink would violate Article 404.8 and create a significant electrical hazard. To comply with Article 404.8, there are several options available. Firstly, the electrical panel can be relocated to a dry location that is not subject to moisture. This is the preferred option whenever possible, as it eliminates the risk of water exposure. Secondly, if relocation is not feasible, a panel that is specifically listed for wet locations can be used. These panels are designed to withstand prolonged exposure to water and prevent water from entering the enclosure. Thirdly, additional protection can be provided to the panel, such as installing a waterproof enclosure or providing adequate ventilation to prevent condensation. However, these measures must be carefully evaluated to ensure that they provide adequate protection and do not compromise the safety or performance of the equipment. It is also important to note that Article 404.8 is not the only NEC provision that applies to electrical installations near water sources. Other relevant articles include those that address grounding, bonding, and the use of ground fault circuit interrupters, GFCIs. Grounding and bonding are essential for providing a path for fault current to flow to ground, which can help to prevent electrical shock. GFCIs are devices that detect small imbalances in current flow and quickly interrupt the circuit, which can also help to prevent electrical shock. In summary, Article 404.8 of the National Electrical Code prohibits the installation of electrical equipment in wet or damp locations unless it is specifically identified for use in such locations and listed by an approved testing agency. Drinking fountains and water sinks are considered wet locations, so electrical panels cannot be installed near these areas unless they are appropriately listed. Compliance with Article 404.8 is essential for ensuring electrical safety and preventing equipment damage. When installing electrical equipment near water sources, it is crucial to consider all applicable NEC provisions and to consult with a qualified electrical professional to ensure that the installation is safe and compliant with all applicable codes. Let's now address some common questions and scenarios related to installing electrical panels near water sources. One common question is whether it is permissible to install an electrical panel in a bathroom. Bathrooms are generally considered damp locations due to the presence of showers, bathtubs, and sinks. Therefore, Article 404.8 would apply, and the electrical panel would need to be listed for damp locations. However, it is important to note that other NEC provisions may also restrict the placement of electrical panels in bathrooms. For example, some codes may prohibit the installation of electrical panels within a certain distance of a shower or bathtub. Another common question is whether it is permissible to install an electrical panel outdoors. Outdoor locations are generally considered wet locations, so Article 404.8 would apply, and the electrical panel would need to be listed for wet locations. In addition, the panel would need to be protected from the elements such as rain, snow, and sunlight. This can be achieved by installing the panel in a weatherproof enclosure or under a canopy. A third common question is whether it is permissible to install an electrical panel in a commercial kitchen. Commercial kitchens are typically considered wet locations due to the presence of sinks, dishwashers, and other water-using equipment. Therefore, Article 404.8 would apply, and the electrical panel would need to be listed for wet locations. In addition, the panel may need to be resistant to grease and other contaminants that are commonly found in commercial kitchens. Another scenario involves the installation of an electrical panel in a laundry room. Laundry rooms can be considered damp or wet locations depending on the specific conditions. If the laundry room is well ventilated and the equipment is not subject to direct splashing or dripping of water, it may be considered a damp location. In this case, the electrical panel would need to be listed for damp locations. However, if the laundry room is subject to frequent splashing or dripping of water, it would be considered a wet location, and the electrical panel would need to be listed for wet locations. It is also important to consider the potential for water leaks when installing electrical panels near water sources. Water leaks can occur from plumbing fixtures, roofs, or other sources, and they can pose a significant threat to electrical equipment. To mitigate this risk, it is advisable to install electrical panels in locations where they are less likely to be exposed to water leaks. In addition, it is important to regularly inspect the area around electrical panels for any signs of water leaks. If a water leak is detected, it should be repaired immediately to prevent damage to the electrical equipment. Furthermore, it is crucial to ensure that all electrical work is performed by qualified and licensed electricians. Electrical work can be dangerous, and it is essential to follow all applicable codes and safety procedures to prevent electrical shock and other hazards. Qualified electricians have the training and experience necessary to safely and properly install and maintain electrical equipment, and they can help to ensure that the installation is compliant with all applicable codes. In summary, when installing electrical panels near water sources, it is essential to carefully consider the environmental conditions and to comply with all applicable NEC provisions. Article 404.8 prohibits the installation of electrical equipment in wet or damp locations unless it is specifically identified for use in such locations and listed by an approved testing agency. Drinking fountains and water sinks are considered wet locations, so electrical panels cannot be installed near these areas unless they are appropriately listed. Consulting with a qualified electrical professional is always advisable to ensure that the installation is safe and compliant with all applicable codes. This includes specific considerations such as bathrooms, outdoor locations, commercial kitchens, and laundry rooms. Furthermore, it's important to check for potential water leaks and use licensed electricians for electrical work.